ever notice how people talk about the 90s music like it was just a few clean categories? Grunge, hip hop, pop, maybe a little alternative rock if they're feeling fancy. But that's not even close to what was actually going on. The 90s weren't organized at all. They were messy, loud, experimental, and constantly shifting. Genres didn't just evolve, they collided, split apart, and rebranded in real time. A band could start as one thing, get labeled something else, and accidentally help create an entirely new sound not even trying. And that's what makes this decade so interesting. Because when you zoom in, you don't see genres, you see chaos that somehow turned into modern music as we know it. So let's break it down, not neatly, not cleanly, but honestly. If there's one sound that cracked the 90s open, it's grunge. And it starts with Nirvana. Suddenly, music didn't need polish, it didn't need perfection, it just needed emotion. Loud, soft, loud dynamics, distorted guitars, and lyrics that sounded more like frustration than performance. That opened the door for Pearl Jam, who stretched grunge into something more classic rock influenced and stadium sized. Then you got Soundgarden pushing heavier, more technical, more intense rock, and Alice in Chains bringing darker, almost haunting harmonies that made grunge feel even more emotionally dense. Outside Seattle, bands like Stone Temple Pilots get labeled grunge too, even though they're really blending hard rock and alternative into something more polished. Then the sound starts getting absorbed into mainstream radio. That's where post grunge takes over. Bands like Bush turn that raw Seattle energy into something more radio friendly. Grunge didn't disappear, it just got rebranded. By the mid 90s, alternative rock stops meaning anything specific. It becomes a giant umbrella for anything that doesn't fit traditional rock or pop. You've got Radiohead evolving from straightforward alt rock into something way more experimental and forward thinking. Then Foo Fighters turn post Nirvana energy into massive melodic stadium rock. Green Day take punk and turn it into mainstream hook heavy radio rock. The Offspring push that same energy but lean harder and faster. And then you got No Doubt blending ska, punk, pop, and a new wave into something completely unclassifiable. Even Weezer leans into that awkward, melodic, emotionally simple sound that becomes a core part of 90s alternative identity. But this is where it also starts getting really interesting, because not all alternative rock lived on the radio. Some of it lived on TV. The 90s had this weird thing where bands could exist through television and cult media just as much as radio. And one of the most overlooked examples of that is Polaris. They weren't just a band, they were tied directly to the adventures of Pete and Pete, basically acting as the show's in-house indie alt soundtrack identity. That Hey Sandy sound alone feels like pure 90s alternative TV energy. Jangly, surreal, slightly off-kilter, and completely different from mainstream rock. And that's the thing about the 90s alternative scene. Some bands weren't trying to dominate charts. They were just shaping the atmosphere of that decade through TV, soundtracks, and underground cult following. That whole layer sits underneath everything else happening in mainstream rock. Now, not all 90s rock was emotional or melodic. Some of it was aggressive, industrial, and designed to provoke reaction. And Marilyn Manson brought shock imagery and industrial rock into mainstream controversy. Nine Inch Nails turned industrial music into something emotional, layered, and deeply human under all the distortion. Even outside pure industrial, that darker production style starts influencing everything. Rock, metal, even pop production. By the mid to late 90s, alternative music isn't alternative anymore. It is the mainstream. You got the Smashing Pumpkins creating huge layered emotional rock that feels both massive and personal. You got Sublime blending reggae, punk, ska, and hip hop into a laid back California hybrid sound. Red Hot Chili Peppers mix funk and alternative rock into something instantly recognizable and radio dominant. Ska briefly explodes in popularity, punk energy returns to the mainstream, and everything starts blending together. Hip hop splits into multiple identities. Notorious B.I.G. defines East Coast storytelling with smooth delivery over gritty production. Tupac brings emotional, political, and raw intensity to West Coast hip hop. Wu-Tang Clan completely changes structure with multiple voices and raw, stripped down beats. And all of this starts influencing other genres in real time. The Prodigy brings aggressive electronic energy that feels closer to rock than traditional dance music. The Chemical Brothers push big beat electronic mainstream into mainstream awareness. Electronic production starts seeping into pop, hip-hop, and rock without anyone fully noticing at first. And you have Oasis and Blur defining Britpop in the UK. Where American alt-rock is messy and emotional, Britpop is melodic, confident, and culturally specific. It becomes a parallel version of alternative rock happening at the exact same time. And you got Spice Girls turning pop into cultural identity. Backstreet Boys and NSYNC, they dominate late 90s charts with highly engineered pop production. Pop stops being simple entertainment and becomes global strategy. But by the end of the decade, genres stopped meaning strict categories. Rock borrows from pop, pop borrows from hip hop borrows from electronic music, alternative becomes everything and nothing at the same time. Even punk becomes mainstream. Everything blends together, everything overlaps, and nothing stays in its lane anymore. So when you look back at the 90s, it's easy to simplify it into labels: grunge, hip hop, pop, alternative. But the reality is way more interesting than that, because the 90s weren't about genres, they were about transformation. And most of the music we still listen to today was shaped in the middle of that chaos.